They were all laughing at my useless art degree around the Thanksgiving table when my phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Acquisition offer, Crimson Aurora series, $4.8 million." I stared at the screen, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, while my brother Devin continued his annual comedy routine about my finger painting career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dining room at my parents' house in Millbrook Heights felt smaller than usual that November evening. The same mahogany table where I'd once spread out my high school art projects now hosted a different kind of showcase, one where I was the main attraction, but not in the way I'd ever wanted. The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across faces I'd loved my entire life, faces that now wore expressions of barely concealed pity mixed with second-hand embarrassment. My mother, Patricia Ashworth, sat at the head of the table in her perfectly pressed cream-colored blouse, the one she reserved for important family discussions. Her manicured fingers drummed against her wineglass as she watched my father, Dr. Richard Ashworth, carve the turkey with surgical precision. Even in casual moments, Dad couldn't help but remind everyone he was Millbrook General's head of cardiology. The way he wielded that carving knife felt like a metaphor for how he'd been dissecting my life choices for the past 4 years. "So, Jade," my Aunt Vivian chimed in, her voice dripping with that particular brand of family concern that always made my stomach clench. "Have you given any more thought to going back to school? I mean, a real degree this time. Something practical." She emphasized the word practical, like it was a life preserver she was throwing to a drowning woman. I'd heard this question in various forms at every family gathering, since I graduated from Whitmore Arts Institute with my Bachelor of Fine Arts. 4 years of rigorous study, countless hours in studios, exhibitions, critiques, and they still referred to it as art school, in the same tone they might use for clown college. My cousin Trevor, fresh out of his MBA program, leaned back in his chair with the smugness only a 24-year-old with a business degree could muster. I mean, let's be honest here. What's the ROI on art? You've been at this for 3 years now, and what do you have to show for it? A few paintings hanging in coffee shops? The coffee shop comment stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. My latest series, Crimson Aurora, had been displayed at Luna's Coffee House on Maple Street for the past 6 months. 3 paintings, each one a 48 by 60-inch canvas that had taken me weeks to complete, priced at $1,200 each. Not exactly Metropolitan Museum material, but they were mine. Every brushstroke, every color choice, every late night I'd spent perfecting the way light bled into darkness. That was my soul translated into something tangible. Devin, my older brother, and the family's golden child set down his wine glass with theatrical precision. He'd been building up to this moment all evening, I could tell. The way he kept glancing at our parents, the little smirk that played at the corners of his mouth whenever the conversation turned to careers. At 29, he was already a junior partner at Millbrook's most prestigious law firm, lived in a penthouse downtown, and drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salary. "Look, Jade," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected in law school. "We're not trying to be mean. We love you. We just want you to be secure, stable. You can't live in Mom and Dad's guest room forever, painting pictures that no one buys." The guest room comment hit its mark. I'd moved back home 8 months ago when my tiny apartment above the art supply store became too expensive to maintain on my irregular income. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I got my feet under me. But here I was, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and high school art awards that felt like relics from a more optimistic time. My father finally looked up from his carving. "Jade, sweetheart, we've supported your artistic hobby for years now, but at some point you need to think about your future. Real security, a retirement plan, health insurance that doesn't come from us." The word hobby echoed in my head like a gong. 26 years old, and my life's passion was still being dismissed as a hobby. I thought about the 5 a.m. mornings I'd spent in my makeshift studio in the garage, the paint-stained clothes I'd worn like armor, the way my heart raced when I discovered a new technique, or finally captured the exact shade of amber I'd been chasing for months. "What about teaching?" my mother suggested, her voice bright with forced optimism. "You could get your education certification, teach high school art. That's a stable career. Good benefits, summers off." Teaching. The fallback plan that every art major heard about constantly. Don't get me wrong. Art teachers are heroes, and education is vital. But the suggestion felt like giving up, like admitting that my real dreams were just that, dreams. That's when my phone, which had been face down beside my plate, buzzed with an email notification. The screen lit up just enough for me to see the sender. Whitmore Gallery director Elena Vasquez. My heart skipped. The Whitmore Gallery wasn't just any gallery. It was the gallery. The kind of place where careers were made, where paintings sold for more money than most people saw in a lifetime. I glanced around the table. Devin was now explaining to our teenage cousin why, quote, creative fields were essentially pyramid schemes. My parents were nodding along, occasionally throwing in their own observations about the importance of practical skills and stable income. Nobody was paying attention to me, which was probably for the best because my hands were starting to shake. I picked up my phone, trying to appear casual, and opened the email. The first line made my breath catch. "Dear Ms. Ashworth, after reviewing your Crimson Aurora series, we would like to extend an acquisition offer." My eyes scanned down to the number, and I had to read it 3 times before it registered. $4.8 million. Not for all 3 paintings. For one, the centerpiece of the series, Aurora Rising. The painting I'd considered my masterpiece, but had been hanging in a coffee shop because I couldn't afford gallery representation. I looked up at my family, still deep in their discussion about my failures and future prospects, completely unaware that everything was about to change. Devin was gesturing with his fork, making some point about market stability. My parents were nodding like bobbleheads, and my aunt was already planning my transition into teaching. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about how quiet I'd been all these years, how I'd absorbed their disappointment and doubt like paint into canvas, how I'd let their voices become louder than my own inner conviction that I was meant for this, that art wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. The email was still glowing on my screen, waiting for my response, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced around this table: power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The words on my phone screen seemed to blur and refocus as I read them again. $4.8 million for Aurora Rising. My throat went dry. My hands trembled so violently I had to set the phone down on the table before I dropped it. The sound it made against the wood was small, but in my head it echoed like thunder. Devin was mid-sentence, something about financial responsibility and growing up when I finally found my voice. It came out as barely a whisper. $4.8 million. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a family enjoying dinner, but the sharp, sudden silence that happens when someone says something so unexpected that everyone's brain needs a moment to process it. My father looked up from his turkey, his surgical precision momentarily forgotten. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I picked up my phone again, my fingers feeling clumsy and disconnected from my hands. The email was still there, still real, still impossible. "The Whitmore Gallery," I said, my voice gaining strength. "They want to buy Aurora Rising for $4.8 million. Devin's fork clattered against his plate. "The what now?" "Aurora Rising. It's one of my paintings. The one hanging in Luna's coffee house." I scrolled through the email, my eyes catching on phrases that made my heart race. Exceptional emotional depth. Groundbreaking technique. Reminiscent of the early masters while maintaining contemporary relevance. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. 4.8. What? Million, Mom. $1 million. The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the sound of Mrs. Henderson's dog barking next door, the subtle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Normal sounds from a normal evening that had just become completely extraordinary. Trevor was the first to speak, his MBA confidence cracking. That's not possible. Coffee shop paintings don't sell for millions. I kept reading, my voice growing stronger with each word. Elena Vasquez, the gallery director, says they've been following my work for months. Apparently, a collector from New York saw Aurora Rising last month and contacted them immediately. She says the painting demonstrates a rare synthesis of classical technique with contemporary emotional authenticity. My Aunt Vivian leaned forward, her earlier condescension replaced by confusion. But it's just hanging in a coffee shop. How did they even know about it? Art doesn't care where it hangs, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Talent doesn't need a museum to be real. Devin shook his head, his lawyer instincts kicking in. This has to be a scam. Nobody pays that much for unknown art. Let me see that email. I held the phone closer to my chest. It's not a scam. Elena Vasquez is one of the most respected gallery directors in the country. She's represented artists who are now in the Museum of Modern Art. My father set down his carving knife completely now, his full attention on me for the first time all evening. Jade, honey, this sounds too good to be true. Are you sure you're not misreading something? I turned the phone screen toward him so he could see the official Whitmore Gallery letterhead, the professional email signature, the detailed terms of the offer. His eyes widened as he read, and I watched his expression shift from skepticism to something I'd never seen before when he looked at my work: respect. Jesus, he whispered. Richard! My mother scolded automatically, but her voice was distant, distracted. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. I scrolled down to read more of the email aloud. Ms. Vasquez says here that the collector is prepared to make an immediate offer with a 48-hour response window. She's also interested in discussing representation for my entire Crimson Aurora series. The entire series? Devin's voice had lost its earlier mockery. He sounded genuinely stunned. 3 paintings total. If this one sells for 4.8, and she thinks the other 2 have similar market value. I did the math in my head, hardly believing it myself. We're talking about potentially $14 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. $14 million. More money than my father made in 5 years of heart surgery. More money than Devin would see in his entire legal career. More money than our entire family had ever possessed at one time. My mother finally set down her wine glass. Jade, I don't understand. How is this possible? You've been struggling to sell them for $1,200 each. Sometimes the right person just needs to see the right piece at the right moment, I said, but even as I said it, I was asking myself the same question. How had this happened? How had my painting, hanging between a community bulletin board and a menu for fair trade coffee, caught the attention of a New York collector? Trevor was frantically typing on his phone. I'm looking up the Whitmore Gallery. Holy shit! Sorry, Aunt Patricia, but this place is legitimate. They sold a painting last year for $23 million. My Aunt Vivian's face had gone pale. $23 million? The artist was unknown 5 years ago, Trevor continued, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. Just like Jade. Devin was still staring at my phone like it might disappear if he looked away. Can I read the whole email? I hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. It felt strange, giving him access to what might be the most important message I'd ever received. But I wanted him to see it, to understand that this wasn't a fluke or a mistake. This was real. As he read, I watched his expression change. The condescending smile disappeared. The eye rolls stopped. By the time he finished, he was looking at me with something I'd never seen from him before. Genuine respect. "Jade," he said quietly, "this is incredible. I mean really incredible. I had no idea." "None of us did," my father said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like regret. I took my phone back, my hands steadier now. The email was still there, still real, still waiting for my response. But something had shifted in the room, something fundamental. The power dynamic that had existed around this table for my entire adult life had just been completely inverted. For the first time in years, I wasn't the family disappointment. I wasn't the dreamer who needed to get realistic. I wasn't the burden living in the guest room. I was the artist whose work was worth more than all their salaries combined. And judging by the stunned silence that had settled over the Thanksgiving table, they were all beginning to realize it too. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I watched my family's faces cycle through emotions like a time-lapse video of weather patterns. Shock, disbelief, confusion, and then something else. Something that made my stomach start to twist in a familiar way. My mother was the first to break. "Well," she said, her voice artificially bright, "this is wonderful news, honey. Really wonderful." But there was something in her tone, something I'd heard before during my childhood whenever I'd won an art contest or received recognition she couldn't quite understand. It was the sound of someone trying to be supportive while simultaneously calculating how this reflected on them. "You know," my Aunt Vivian chimed in, suddenly animated, "I always said you had talent, remember, Patricia? I was the one who bought you those expensive art supplies for your 16th birthday, the professional-grade paints." I stared at her. The art supplies she was referring to had been a generic watercolor set from the drugstore, and she'd complained about the $20 cost for months afterward. But now, in the golden light of my unexpected success, history was apparently being rewritten in real time. Devin leaned back in his chair, his shock morphing into something that looked suspiciously like calculation. "You know what this means, right? Tax implications are going to be massive. You'll need to set up an LLC, maybe a trust. Lucky for you, I know exactly how to structure this kind of windfall." "Devin," I said slowly, "I haven't even responded to the offer yet." "Oh, but you have to accept it," Trevor interrupted. "I mean, obviously. This could set you up for life. And think about what it means for the family. We're related to a millionaire artist now." There it was, the word that made everything click into place. We. My father cleared his throat, and I recognized the tone he used when he was about to deliver important medical news to a patient's family. "Jade, this is a significant opportunity, and we want to make sure you handle it properly. You're going to need guidance, financial planning, investment strategies. I'll need to review the gallery contract," Devin added. "Make sure they're not taking advantage of you. Gallery commissions can be brutal if you don't negotiate properly. And you'll want to think about diversifying immediately," my mother said, as if she'd been planning art investments her entire life instead of telling me to get a teaching certificate 20 minutes ago. "Real estate maybe, something stable to anchor the portfolio." I felt something cold settling in my chest as I listened to them. Portfolio, investment strategies, tax implications. They were already spending my money, already making plans for wealth that technically didn't even exist yet. But more than that, they were inserting themselves into a success they'd spent years telling me was impossible. "You know," my Aunt Vivian continued, "I've always believed in following your dreams. I think that's so important for young people today. Too many of them get caught up in practical considerations instead of pursuing their passions." I almost laughed. This was the same woman who had suggested I become a dental hygienist just 6 months ago because at least people always need their teeth cleaned. Trevor was still scrolling through his phone. "I'm looking at art market trends. If you play this right, Jade, you could become a major player. But you'll need representation, management, someone to handle the business side while you focus on creating." Someone like you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Well, I do have an MBA, and families should stick together on something this big. Families should stick together. I looked around the table at these people who had spent the last hour systematically dismantling my life choices, and now they were talking about sticking together. Now that there was money involved, suddenly my art degree wasn't worthless. Suddenly my hobby was a career worth managing. Suddenly my dreams were worth protecting. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. This is such a big decision, and you've never dealt with this kind of money before. It's a good thing you have family who can help guide you through it. The patronizing tone was still there, just wrapped in a prettier package. I was still the child who needed guidance, still the one who couldn't be trusted to make important decisions on her own. The only difference was that now my decisions involved millions of dollars instead of hundreds. We should call Edgar Thornfield, my father announced, referencing the family's financial advisor. Get him involved immediately. He'll know how to protect this windfall. And we'll need to think about security, Devin added. Once word gets out that you're worth this much, you'll need to be careful. Maybe you should move back home permanently. It's safer here, and we can help you manage everything. Move back home permanently. I felt the walls of my childhood bedroom closing in around me, except now they'd be gilded with success I'd achieved despite their constant discouragement, not because of their support. You know what's funny? I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. An hour ago, you were all convinced I was wasting my life, my art was a hobby. My degree was worthless, I was irresponsible and unrealistic and needed to get my head out of the clouds. The table went quiet again, but this time it was uncomfortable. Guilty. Well, we didn't know, my mother said defensively. How were we supposed to know that someone would pay millions for your paintings? Because I told you they were good. I've been telling you for years that I was working on something important, something meaningful, but you never believed me. Jade, that's not fair, Devin protested. We were just being realistic about the art market. Most artists don't make it big. You weren't being realistic, I said, my voice growing stronger. You were being dismissive. There's a difference. I thought about all the times I'd tried to share my excitement, about a new technique I'd learned, a breakthrough I'd had, a piece I was particularly proud of. How their eyes would glaze over, how they'd change the subject to Devin's latest case or Dad's hospital politics. How they'd suggest, again and again, that I needed a backup plan, a real career, something practical. We've always supported your art, my Aunt Vivian said weakly. No, I said, and the word came out sharper than I'd intended. You tolerated it, you endured it, you waited for me to grow out of it. Supporting would have meant believing in me when the validation came from a coffee shop instead of $1 million gallery. Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, maybe we could have been more encouraging, but this changes everything. Now we know you're the real deal. But I was always the real deal, I said. The only thing that's changed is the price tag. My father reached for his wine glass, his hand not quite steady. Jade, you're right, we could have been more supportive. But what matters now is moving forward. This is your moment, and we want to help you make the most of it. Now you want to help, I repeated slowly. Now that there's money involved. That's not what this is about, my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. I looked around the table at their faces that had been skeptical and dismissive an hour ago, now eager and calculating. They weren't celebrating my artistic achievement. They weren't proud of my persistence or my talent or the years I'd spent perfecting my craft. They were excited about the money. They were already figuring out how to be part of it, how to benefit from it, how to manage it. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than all their years of doubt. They still didn't believe in my art. They believed in the dollar amount attached to it, but that wasn't the same thing. If the gallery had offered $1,200 instead of $4.8 million, they'd still be suggesting I become a teacher. The betrayal wasn't just that they'd never supported my dreams. It was that they were willing to pretend they had, as long as there was profit involved. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to process the offer privately, but as I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom, my mind wasn't on processing anything. It was on planning. Years of being underestimated had taught me something valuable. The element of surprise was often the only weapon the overlooked possessed. In my room, surrounded by faded posters and participation ribbons, I sat cross-legged on my bed and opened my laptop. The Whitmore Gallery's website filled the screen, and for the first time, I allowed myself to really study what Elena Vasquez had built. The gallery wasn't just prestigious, it was revolutionary. She had a track record of taking unknown artists and launching them into art history. I scrolled through the artist profiles, noting something interesting. Every single artist Elena represented had one thing in common. They'd been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated before she found them. A homeless veteran whose sculptures now sold for millions. A housewife whose paintings hung in the Guggenheim. A high school dropout whose installations had redefined contemporary art. Elena Vasquez didn't just buy art. She rescued artists from obscurity and turned them into icons. I pulled out my phone and opened the email again, reading it with new eyes. She wasn't just offering to buy one painting. She was offering to represent my entire career. The acquisition of Aurora Rising was just the beginning. She wanted to schedule a studio visit, discuss my artistic vision, plan a solo exhibition. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the next 2 hours researching everything I could find about Elena, the gallery, and the art market. I made notes, cross-referenced prices, studied comparable sales. By the time I was done, I had a clear picture of not just what my painting was worth, but what my future could look like. Then I did something I'd never done before. I took an inventory of my own power. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Assets and advantages, Jade Ashworth. At the top of the list, I wrote 3 completed paintings with potential $14 million plus market value. Below that, direct contact with top-tier gallery representation. Then, 0 contractual obligations to anyone. That last point was crucial. I wasn't signed with any gallery. I didn't have a manager or agent taking a percentage. I didn't owe anyone anything. I was completely free to make my own decisions. I kept writing. Advantages. Family underestimation has kept expectations low. No one has been tracking my financial decisions or artistic progress. Complete creative control maintained throughout development process. As I typed, I realized something powerful. While my family had been dismissing my work, I'd been quietly building something they knew nothing about. The Crimson Aurora series wasn't just 3 paintings. It was the culmination of years of experimentation, technique refinement, and artistic evolution. I'd documented every stage of the process, photographed every iteration, kept detailed notes about my inspiration and methodology. I had created not just art, but a complete artistic narrative that could support a major exhibition and career launch. My phone buzzed with a text from Devin. "We should meet tomorrow to discuss strategy. This is too big to handle alone." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Instead, I opened my email and began typing a response to Elena Vasquez. "Dear Ms. Vasquez," I wrote, "thank you for your interest in Aurora Rising and the Crimson Aurora series. I'm honored by your offer and would like to schedule a call to discuss the acquisition and potential representation. However, I'll need to establish some parameters for our conversation." I paused, thinking about what those parameters should be. Downstairs, I could hear my family's voices drifting up from the dining room. They were still talking about me, about the money, about all the ways they could help manage my newfound success. But they weren't talking about my art. I would prefer to handle all negotiations and discussions directly, without third-party involvement, I continued typing. Additionally, I'd like to discuss not just the sale of Aurora Rising, but the broader vision for launching my career as a serious artist. I believe my work has significance beyond its monetary value, and I'm looking for representation that understands and shares that perspective. It was a professional way of saying, I want to work with someone who cares about art, not just profit. I scheduled the email to send in the morning, then closed my laptop and looked around my room. Tomorrow, everything would change. But unlike my family, I wasn't going to let success happen to me. I was going to actively shape it. I pulled out my sketchbook and started making plans. Not financial plans or investment strategies, but artistic ones. If Elena was serious about representation, I needed to be ready with a vision that went beyond the Crimson Aurora series. I started sketching ideas for my next collection, themes that had been percolating in my mind for months. The Invisible Voices series, portraits of people who'd been overlooked or dismissed, women who'd changed history but been written out of textbooks, artists who'd died poor but left behind masterpieces, activists who'd fought for justice but never received recognition. As I drew, I realized that every face I was sketching looked familiar. They all had something in common with the woman who'd been sitting quietly in the corner of family gatherings, absorbing dismissal and doubt, while secretly building something extraordinary. My phone rang. It was my mother. Jade, honey, we're all still downstairs talking about this wonderful opportunity. We really think you should come down and discuss it with the family. This affects all of us, in a way. How does my art career affect all of you? I asked. Well, we're your family. We care about your success. And frankly, this kind of money, it changes things. For everyone. There it was. The truth, finally spoken out loud. This wasn't about my artistic achievement or my personal validation. This was about money that could benefit the entire family, and they wanted to make sure they weren't left out. I appreciate the concern, I said carefully, but I need to handle this myself. It's my work, my career, my decision. Jade, don't be stubborn. You've never dealt with anything like this before. You need experienced people to guide you. I've never dealt with success before because you all convinced me I'd never achieve it, I said. But I figured out how to create art worth millions without any guidance from this family. I think I can figure out how to sell it too. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. My mother wasn't calling to congratulate me or celebrate my achievement. She was calling to make sure the family would benefit from my success. After I hung up, I returned to my sketchbook, but now I was drawing with different energy. Each line was deliberate, purposeful, charged with the power of someone who had finally recognized her own worth. I wasn't just planning my next art series. I was planning my independence. And for the first time in my life, I was going to create something that belonged entirely to me. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. Friday morning, not because I had to, but because my body was humming with energy I'd never felt before. The house was still quiet as I slipped down to the kitchen and made coffee, watching the sun rise through the window above the sink. By 6 a.m., my scheduled email to Elena Vasquez had sent itself, and my phone was already buzzing with her response. Jade, I'm thrilled by your professionalism and vision. Can we speak this morning at 10 a.m. Pacific? I believe we have much to discuss beyond Aurora Rising. 10 a.m. Pacific meant 1 p.m. Eastern. Perfect. That would give me time to execute the plan I'd been forming since 3 a.m., when I'd finally stopped sketching and started strategizing. At 7 a.m., I drove to Luna's coffee house. Marcus Chen, the owner, was just unlocking the front door when I pulled up. Jade, you're early today. The usual cappuccino? Actually, Marcus, I need to talk to you about my paintings. He gestured me inside, and I followed him to the counter where he started the espresso machine. What's on your mind? Please tell me you're not taking them down. They've brought in so many customers asking about them. That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. How many people have asked about purchasing them? Marcus paused, steam wand in hand. Purchasing? Well, there was a well-dressed woman from New York last month who spent an hour studying Aurora Rising. She took photos, asked a lot of questions about you. And there have been others. At least a dozen people have inquired about prices. Did any of them leave contact information? A few did. I have their cards in the office. Why? I pulled out my phone and showed him Elena's email. Marcus read it twice, his eyes growing wider each time. 4.8 million? Jade, that's incredible. Marcus, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it completely confidential until I say otherwise. He nodded, and I continued. I want you to remove all 3 paintings from display immediately. Store them in your office, out of sight. If anyone asks about them, tell them they've been withdrawn for private sale. Don't mention the Whitmore Gallery or the offer amount. Of course, but why the secrecy? Because I need to control how this information gets out. And I need to protect the paintings until I finalize everything with the gallery. Marcus helped me carefully remove Aurora Rising, Crimson Dawn, and Velvet Storm from their display spots. As we worked, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before: how many people had been photographing them. There were small nail holes in the wall where people had clearly been taking detailed shots, getting close enough to capture the brushwork and texture. Marcus, how many people have photographed these paintings? Honestly, dozens. That woman from New York wasn't the only one. I've seen people with professional cameras, art students with sketchbooks, even some guy who looked like a dealer taking measurements. My work had been getting more attention than I'd realized. While I had been focused on the local reception, collectors and dealers had apparently been discovering and documenting my art for months. The Whitmore Gallery's interest wasn't as sudden as it had seemed. It was the culmination of a groundswell I hadn't even noticed. Can you get me those contact cards? The people who inquired about purchasing? Absolutely. Give me 5 minutes. While Marcus retrieved the cards from his office, I stood in the empty space where my paintings had hung. For 6 months, this had been my gallery. Not prestigious, not exclusive, but mine. And now I was taking that control back. Marcus returned with a small stack of business cards. I flipped through them quickly. 2 gallery representatives from Boston, an art consultant from Philadelphia, a private collector from Washington, D.C., and several others with impressive credentials. Marcus, I need one more favor. When people ask about the paintings being gone, I want you to tell them that the artist has been signed by exclusive representation and is no longer available for direct sales. Don't say which gallery, just that I'm now represented. You want to create mystery around it. Exactly. Scarcity drives value. By 9 a.m., I was back home, and the house was finally stirring to life. I could hear my parents moving around upstairs, and the smell of bacon suggested my mother was making her weekend breakfast spread. I went straight to my room and started preparing for my call with Elena. At 9:30, my phone started ringing. Devin. Jade, I've been thinking about yesterday, and I really think we should meet this morning. I've already contacted Edgar Thornfield, and he can see us at 11. I can't. I have a call with the gallery at 1 p.m. Perfect. That gives us time to prep you. You shouldn't go into that negotiation alone. I'm not negotiating today. I'm having a conversation about artistic vision and career development. Jade, everything is negotiation when this much money is involved. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Devin, I appreciate the concern, but I'm handling this myself. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, Jade, this is bigger than your art. This affects the whole family's financial future. There it was again, the assumption that my success belonged to all of them. How does my art career affect the family's financial future? Come on, don't be naive. This kind of money has implications. Tax strategies, estate planning, investment opportunities. We could all benefit from smart management of this windfall. It's not a windfall, Devin. It's payment for work I created, work you've been telling me was worthless for years. I never said it was worthless. You said it was a hobby. You suggested I become a teacher. You called my degree useless. Another long pause. Maybe I was wrong about the market value, but that doesn't change the fact that you need professional guidance. I'm getting professional guidance. From the gallery director who's built a career launching artists like me. A gallery director who wants to profit from your work. I'm family. I want what's best for you. If you wanted what was best for me, you would have supported my art when it was hanging in a coffee shop, not when it's worth millions. I hung up before he could respond. 10 minutes later, my mother knocked on my door. Jade, can we talk? I opened the door to find her holding a tray with coffee and pastries. I thought you might be hungry. Big day today. She set the tray on my desk and sat on the edge of my bed. Honey, Devin told me about your call with the gallery. We're just worried that you might be making decisions too quickly. What decisions? I haven't made any decisions yet. Well, talking to them without having a lawyer present seems rushed. It's a conversation about my art, not a contract negotiation. But it could become a contract negotiation very quickly, and once you commit to something... She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. Once I commit to something, what? Once you commit to exclusive representation with one gallery, you lose leverage with other potential buyers. What if there are collectors who would pay even more? I stared at her. She was talking about my art like it was stock futures, something to be traded for maximum profit rather than shared with people who understood its meaning. Mom, this isn't about finding the highest bidder. Elena Vasquez understands my work. She has a vision for my career that goes beyond just selling paintings. Sweetheart, you can have vision and good business sense. They're not mutually exclusive. You're right, they're not. But good business sense means working with people who value what you create, not just what they can profit from it. She was quiet for a moment then. We just don't want you to be taken advantage of. By who? The gallery director who's offering to pay me millions for my work, or the family who spent years telling me that work was worthless? My mother's face flushed. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Yesterday, my art was a hobby I needed to grow out of. Today, it's an asset you want to help me manage. The only thing that changed was the price tag. After she left, I sat alone with my coffee and pastries, looking at the empty walls where my high school art awards used to hang. I'd taken them down years ago, tired of being reminded of a time when my family had been proud of my artistic achievements. But now I understood something I'd missed then. Their pride had never been about my art. It had been about my success within systems they understood and approved of. High school art contests were safe. Coffee shop displays were disappointing. $1 million gallery offers were opportunities to be managed. But my art had always been the same. The only thing that changed was other people's perception of its value. At 12:30, I closed my bedroom door, opened my laptop, and prepared to have the most important conversation of my career with someone who had contacted me because of my art, not despite it. At exactly 1 p.m., my phone rang. Elena Vasquez's voice was warm but professional, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of making artists' dreams come true. Jade, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your email this morning was exactly what I hoped to see. An artist who understands that talent and business acumen aren't mutually exclusive. For the next hour, we talked about everything except money. Elena asked about my artistic process, my inspiration for the Crimson Aurora series, my vision for future work. She understood the technical aspects of my painting in ways my family never had, discussing my use of layering techniques and color theory with genuine expertise. Aurora Rising isn't just a beautiful painting, she said. It's a masterpiece of emotional architecture. The way you've built tension through color gradation, then released it in that burst of gold. It's sophisticated work that deserves sophisticated presentation. When she finally mentioned the acquisition, it was in the context of launching my career, not just making a sale. The collector who's interested in Aurora Rising isn't just buying a painting. He's investing in an artist he believes will define the next generation of contemporary art. That's why he's willing to pay premium prices now, before the market catches up to your true value. What do you mean, before the market catches up? Jade, I've been tracking emerging artists for 20 years. I can spot transformative talent early, and you have it. But the art world moves slowly. It takes time for critics to notice, for museums to acquire, for auction houses to establish value. Right now, you're flying under the radar, which means we can build your career strategically instead of reactively. She outlined a plan that took my breath away. A solo exhibition at the Whitmore Gallery in 6 months. Museum introductions. Critic previews. A catalog essay by Dr. Amanda Reeves, one of the most respected contemporary art historians in the country. This isn't about selling paintings, Elena said. This is about establishing you as a serious artist whose work will be studied and collected for decades to come. By the time we hung up, I felt like I'd been given a roadmap to a future I'd never dared to imagine. But more than that, I felt understood in a way my family had never understood me. Elena saw my art the way I saw it, as something meaningful, not just valuable. I was still processing the conversation when I heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through my bedroom window, I could see Devon's BMW and a black sedan I didn't recognize. Then I watched Devon, my father, and a man in an expensive suit walking toward the front door. Edgar Thornfield. They'd brought the family financial advisor anyway. I heard the front door open, followed by my mother's voice. "Oh, wonderful! Edgar, thank you so much for coming. Jade will be so grateful for your guidance." I stayed in my room, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs. 20 minutes passed before my father knocked on my door. "Jade, can you come downstairs? We have some people here who'd like to meet with you." "I'm not interested in meeting with anyone right now." "Sweetheart, Edgar drove all the way from downtown to help us understand your options. The least you can do is hear what he has to say." I opened the door. My father was standing in the hallway, wearing the expression he used when he thought he was being reasonable, but was actually being manipulative. "Dad, I explicitly told Devon I was handling this myself." "And you are, but there's no harm in getting professional advice." I got professional advice. From Elena Vasquez. For an hour. "Jade, a gallery director isn't going to give you unbiased financial guidance. They have their own interests to protect." "And Edgar doesn't. He manages the family's investments. He has an interest in convincing me to let him manage mine, too." My father's jaw tightened. "Edgar has been our advisor for 15 years. He's helped us build substantial wealth through careful planning and conservative investments." "Conservative investments," I repeated, "like telling me to give up art and become a teacher?" "That's different. This is about protecting money you've actually earned. Money I earned through art, the same art you wanted me to abandon." I could hear voices getting louder downstairs. Devon was apparently explaining something to Edgar in his lawyer voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound authoritative and important. "Look," my father said, "just come down and listen. You don't have to commit to anything. But these are complex financial decisions, and you're going to need help whether you want to admit it or not." There was something in his tone that triggered years of accumulated frustration, the assumption that I couldn't handle important decisions, the certainty that I needed their guidance to navigate my own success. "Dad, I've been making complex decisions for years, like spending my last $300 on professional-grade paint instead of groceries, like choosing to develop a unique artistic vision instead of copying popular styles that would sell easier, like persisting with my work when everyone I loved told me I was wasting my time." Those weren't financial decisions. They were exactly financial decisions. Every choice I made about my art was a choice about my financial future. The difference is, I was willing to invest in myself when no one else would. I walked past him toward the stairs. If they were determined to have this conversation, we were going to have it on my terms. The living room looked like a board meeting. Edgar Thornfield sat in my father's chair, paper spread across the coffee table. Devon was pacing near the window, gesturing as he spoke. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, looking like she was hosting a very important social event. "Jade!" Edgar stood up as I entered, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your extraordinary success. Your family tells me you've received a significant offer for your artwork." "I've received interest from a gallery, yes." "Well, that's wonderful." Now, I understand the amount in question is substantial, which means we need to discuss tax implications immediately. Capital gains, estimated payments, potential business structuring. He was talking fast, pulling out charts and spreadsheets, filling the air with financial jargon. But I was watching my family's faces, seeing how they lit up when he mentioned specific numbers and strategies. The key, Edgar continued, is to think beyond this single transaction. We want to position you for long-term wealth building. Real estate investments, diversified portfolios, maybe a family trust structure that could benefit everyone. There it was again, everyone. Edgar, I said quietly, can I ask you a question? Of course. Have you ever sold a painting? He looked confused. I'm sorry? Have you ever created something, put your heart and soul into it, and then sold it to someone who understood its value? Well, no, but have you ever spent 3 months perfecting a single brushstroke because you knew it was the difference between good and transcendent? Edgar glanced at my father uncertainly. Jade, I'm not sure I understand the relevance. The relevance is that you're all treating my art like a lottery ticket. Like something that happened to me instead of something I created through years of dedication and skill. Devin stepped forward. Jade, we're not diminishing your achievement, we're trying to help you maximize it. You're trying to manage it. There's a difference. I looked around the room at the spreadsheets, the charts, the serious faces discussing my future as if I weren't there. Then I thought about my conversation with Elena, how she talked about my work with respect and understanding. I need to tell you all something, I said. The Whitmore Gallery isn't just interested in buying one painting. They want to represent my entire career. They're planning a solo exhibition, museum introductions, a career launch that could establish me as a major contemporary artist. Edgar's eyes lit up. That's even better. Multiple revenue streams, ongoing income potential. It's not about the money, I said, my voice rising. It's about the art. It's about finally working with people who understand what I'm trying to create. Money and art don't have to be mutually exclusive, my mother said gently. You can have both. You're right, I can have both. But I'm going to have them on my terms. Working with people who respect my vision, not people who see me as a financial opportunity. The room went quiet. Edgar shuffled his papers uncomfortably. Devin stopped pacing. My parents exchanged the look they'd perfected over 30 years of marriage. The one that said they were dealing with a difficult child who didn't understand what was best for her. But I wasn't a child anymore, and for the first time in my life I had something they wanted more than they had something I needed. The power had shifted, and we all knew it. Monday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I hired my own lawyer. Not the family lawyer who'd handled my parents' wills and Devin's real estate closings, but someone who specialized in artist representation and intellectual property. Catherine Belmont had been recommended by Elena, and after a 2-hour consultation, I understood why. Your family's financial advisor is giving you advice that benefits them, not you, Catherine said bluntly as we sat in her downtown office overlooking the city. A family trust structure, joint investments, that's wealth management designed to keep control within the family unit, not to protect your individual interests as an artist. She spread out a series of documents across her mahogany desk. What you need is artist-specific legal protection, copyright registration for your entire body of work, trademark protection for your name and artistic identity, and most importantly, ironclad agreements that prevent anyone from making decisions about your career without your explicit consent. Catherine had already begun the process of filing formal copyright documentation for not just the Crimson Aurora series, but every piece I'd created in the past 5 years. Elena told me you keep detailed process documentation and photos of your work in progress. That's going to be invaluable for establishing creation dates and proving originality. I never thought of that as legal protection, I just documented my process for my own reference. Artists who think ahead like that are the ones who keep control of their careers, Catherine said. You've been protecting yourself without even realizing it. She pulled out another set of papers. Now, about the Whitmore Gallery agreement. Elena sent over their standard representation contract, and it's actually quite favorable. They're offering exclusive representation, but with performance clauses that protect you if they don't meet agreed-upon exhibition and sales targets. I reviewed the contract carefully. Unlike Edgar's confusing spreadsheets and investment projections, this document was clear and focused on my career development. The Whitmore Gallery would handle all sales, exhibitions, and career advancement, but I retained creative control and final approval over all decisions. What about the acquisition of Aurora Rising? Separate transaction, handled simultaneously. $4.8 million, less the gallery's 20% commission. The collector is serious. He's already arranged financing and wants to close within 2 weeks. 20% commission meant the gallery would earn nearly $1 million from the sale. But as Catherine explained, that money would fund my career development, exhibition costs, marketing, and access to collectors I could never reach on my own. Elena's investment in you isn't just the exhibition space, Catherine continued. She's spending approximately $200,000 on your solo show. Catalog production, critic previews, opening event, museum liaison outreach. That's money she only spends on artists she believes will generate substantial long-term value. By Wednesday, I had a complete legal framework protecting my interests: copyright documentation, business entity formation, representation agreement, and, most importantly, a formal statement of creative independence that Catherine had helped me draft. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I found them in the kitchen, where my mother was preparing dinner and my father was reading medical journals at the table. "Jade, perfect timing. Edgar called today with some preliminary investment strategies. He's found some excellent opportunities for real estate syndication that could—" "Mom, I need to tell you both something." I set a folder on the kitchen table. Inside were copies of all the legal documents I'd signed, along with a letter Catherine had helped me write explaining my decisions. "I've hired my own lawyer and signed with the Whitmore Gallery for exclusive representation. The sale of Aurora Rising is moving forward, and I've established my own business entity to handle all artistic income." My father looked up from his journal. "Jade, that seems premature. We haven't had a chance to review." "There's nothing for you to review. These are my decisions about my career." I opened the folder and showed them the representation agreement. Elena Vasquez is now my exclusive representative. All business inquiries about my work go through her gallery. All career decisions are made by me, in consultation with my lawyer. My mother's face went pale. "Sweetheart, you're making major financial decisions without any family input. That's not like you." "Actually, it's exactly like me. I've been making career decisions independently for years. The only difference is that now those decisions involve significant money." My father stood up, his medical authority kicking in. "Jade, you're being influenced by people who have financial interests in your work. They're not looking out for your best interests the way family would." "Dad, Elena Vasquez's commission structure means she only makes money if my career succeeds long-term. Edgar's management fees come out of my wealth, whether my art career thrives or fails. Who has the bigger incentive to protect my interests?" I pulled out another document. This is a formal statement of creative independence that my lawyer helped me draft. It establishes that I am the sole decision-maker regarding my artistic career, business partnerships, and creative output. Devin's car pulled into the driveway as I was explaining the legal protections I'd put in place. He walked into the kitchen carrying a briefcase and wearing his most serious lawyer expression. "Jade, I'm glad you're here. I've been reviewing the gallery contract you mentioned, and there are some serious issues we need to discuss. How did you get a copy of my contract?" "Edgar requested it from the gallery for review. As your family's legal advisor—" "You're not my legal advisor," I interrupted. "You're my brother, who happens to be a lawyer, and you had no authorization to request my private business documents." Devin's confidence faltered slightly. Jade, I was trying to protect your interests by accessing my private contracts without permission. That's a violation of attorney-client privilege, even if no formal relationship existed. Catherine had prepared me for this possibility. Devin, any lawyer who reviews private documents without client authorization is violating professional ethics standards. I hope you didn't share that contract with anyone else. The kitchen fell silent. Devin's face reddened as he realized he'd made a serious professional error. Furthermore, I continued, I've established legal protections that prevent anyone from making business inquiries or decisions about my work without my written consent. That includes family members. I pulled out the final document from my folder. This is a cease and desist letter that will be sent to Edgar Thornfield if he continues to present himself as having any authority over my financial decisions. Catherine prepared it this morning. My mother sat down heavily at the table. Jade, this is all so adversarial. We're your family. We love you. I love you too. But love doesn't give you the right to make decisions about my career or access my private business information. My father's voice was strained. We're just trying to help. This is all happening so fast, and you're dealing with amounts of money none of us have experience with. You're right that it's happening fast. But I'm not dealing with it alone. I have professional representation from people who specialize in artist careers. Elena has launched dozens of successful artists. Catherine has protected creative professionals for 20 years. These aren't random people. They're experts in exactly what I'm doing. Devin finally spoke, his lawyer training helping him recognize the strength of my position. Jade, I apologize for overstepping. I genuinely thought I was helping, but I can see how my actions violated your privacy. Apology accepted. But Devin, this is important. I need you to understand that my art career is not a family business venture. It's my profession, and I'm going to manage it professionally. I closed the folder and looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where my family had gathered for every holiday and celebration, where they'd expressed doubt about my future countless times. The Aurora Rising sale will close next Friday. The gallery exhibition is scheduled for March. My lawyer has established a business structure that protects my interests and ensures my creative independence. This is happening, with or without family approval. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then my mother spoke, her voice small and confused. When did you become so business-minded? I thought about that question as I gathered my documents. I became business-minded the day I decided to treat my art like a career instead of a hobby. I've been running a small business for years. You just never recognized it as one. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. Jade, what happens to our relationship if you don't need our support anymore? I turned back to face him. Dad, that depends on whether you can love and respect the person I actually am, instead of trying to manage the person you think I should become. Thursday morning, Elena called with news that changed everything I thought I knew about my situation. Jade, I need to share something with you that's going to sound almost unbelievable. Do you remember that collector from New York who saw Aurora Rising at the coffee shop? Marcus mentioned a well-dressed woman who spent a lot of time studying it. That was Dr. Sarah Montgomery, one of the most influential contemporary art collectors in the country. But here's what you don't know. She didn't just stumble across your work, she was sent there. I sat down heavily in my desk chair. Sent by who? By me. 3 months ago, I received a tip from an art student at Whitmore Institute. Your former professor, Daniel Rodriguez, had been showing slides of your senior thesis work in his advanced painting seminars. He told students that one of his graduates was producing, quote, museum-quality work, but flying completely under the radar. The room seemed to tilt. Professor Rodriguez had been my mentor, but I hadn't spoken to him since graduation. I'd assumed he'd forgotten about me like most professors forget their students. Daniel contacted me directly, Elena continued. He sent photos of your thesis pieces and told me you were working on something extraordinary called the Crimson Aurora series. He said you were exhibiting in a coffee shop, but that your work deserved international attention. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. So the discovery of my work wasn't accidental? Nothing in the art world is accidental at this level, Jade. Daniel has been quietly advocating for you in academic circles for over a year. Dr. Montgomery's casual visit to Luna's coffee house was actually a formal evaluation trip. She spent 3 hours there, taking detailed photographs and notes. Elena paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. But there's more. After Dr. Montgomery's report, I started tracking your work more systematically. I hired a private art researcher to document your entire artistic development, from your student pieces through your current series. You hired a researcher? Her name is Anna Kowalski, and she's one of the best art historians on the East Coast. For the past 2 months, she's been building a comprehensive academic case for your artistic significance. Anna has documented techniques in your work that haven't been seen since the early abstract expressionists, combined with contemporary themes that speak directly to current cultural conversations. I was quiet, trying to process the magnitude of what Elena was telling me. While my family had been dismissing my work as a hobby, a network of art professionals had been carefully documenting and advocating for my artistic development. Elena, are you saying that multiple people have been tracking my career without my knowledge? I'm saying that serious people in the art world recognized your talent long before the market did. Dr. Montgomery's collector group has been waiting for the right moment to make acquisition offers. The $4.8 million isn't an impulse purchase. It's the result of months of careful evaluation and market positioning. She sent me a digital folder while we were still on the phone. I'm sharing Anna's research with you now. You need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. I opened the files and found myself looking at the most comprehensive analysis of my work I had ever seen. Anna had cataloged over 40 pieces, from my sophomore year paintings through my current series. She'd identified recurring themes, technical innovations, and artistic evolution patterns. Most incredibly, she'd written a 20-page academic paper titled Emergent Voices: The Contemporary Relevance of Jade Ashworth's Chromatic Narratives. Jade, are you looking at the academic paper? I'm reading it now. Anna calls my work a bridge between classical technique and contemporary emotional authenticity. She says my color theory applications represent a sophisticated understanding of psychological impact rarely seen in emerging artists. Keep reading. The conclusion is what matters most. I scrolled to the final section and read aloud. Ashworth's work demonstrates the hallmarks of artists who define generational shifts in contemporary art. Her technical mastery, combined with unique thematic vision, positions her for significant long-term influence in the field. Market indicators suggest her work will appreciate substantially over the next decade, making current acquisitions highly strategic investments. Anna is recommending my work as an investment. Anna is recommending your work as historically significant art that happens to also be an excellent investment. There is a difference. Elena explained that Anna's research had been shared with 3 major museums, all of which had expressed interest in future acquisitions. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles was already discussing my work for their Emerging Voices exhibition next year. Elena, how long have you been planning this career launch? Since Daniel first contacted me 6 months ago. But Jade, I need you to understand something crucial. None of this happened because of family connections or luck. It happened because your work is genuinely exceptional, and people who know art recognize that quality. I thought about my family's reaction to my success, their assumption that it was sudden and probably unsustainable. But Elena was describing months of professional evaluation and strategic planning by experts who understood exactly what they were looking at. There's something else you need to know, Elena continued. Your family's financial advisor contacted me yesterday. My stomach dropped. Edgar called you? He wanted to discuss, quote, optimizing your gallery relationship for maximum financial benefit. He suggested that you might be willing to take a lower commission rate in exchange for faster sales turnover. He what? Edgar Thornfield presented himself as your financial representative and attempted to negotiate contract terms on your behalf. He seemed to think that moving more paintings quickly at lower prices would be better than building long-term value through careful career development. I felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Elena, I explicitly told my family that you were my exclusive representative. I know. I told Mr. Thornfield that I only discuss contract terms directly with artists, never with third parties. But Jade, his approach revealed something important about how your family views your career, which is, they see your art as a commodity to be liquidated for immediate profit. They don't understand that what we're building is a sustainable career that will generate value for decades. Elena explained that Edgar's suggestions would have been disastrous for my long-term prospects. Quick sales at reduced prices would have established a low market value for my work, making it nearly impossible to command premium prices later. Professional artists don't just sell art, Elena said. They build market positions. Every sale establishes precedent for future pricing. Every exhibition shapes critical perception. Every collector relationship influences future opportunities. So Edgar's advice would have damaged my career prospects? His advice would have turned you into a quick profit artist instead of a serious contemporary voice. The difference between those two paths is the difference between selling work for thousands versus millions. I hung up the phone and sat in my room, surrounded by documents that proved my family had no idea what they were talking about. While they'd been offering unsolicited advice about managing my success, I'd actually been succeeding according to plans they knew nothing about. Dr. Rodriguez had been advocating for me, Dr. Montgomery had been evaluating me, Anna Kowalski had been documenting my artistic significance. Elena had been strategically positioning my career launch. None of them had needed my family's input or approval. The people who actually understood art had been taking me seriously all along. My phone buzzed with a text from Devon. Jade, we need to talk about Edgar's conversation with your gallery. There might have been a miscommunication. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There had been no miscommunication. There had been a family member overstepping boundaries I'd clearly established. Attempting to interfere with professional relationships he had no authority to access. For the first time, I had documentation proving that my family's help wasn't just unwanted, it was potentially damaging to everything I'd worked to build. And now I had the power to stop it. Friday morning arrived with the closing of the Aurora Rising sale. At 10 a.m., I sat in Catherine's office, watching her review the final paperwork, while a certified check for $3.84 million lay on the desk between us. After the gallery's commission, taxes, and legal fees, I was looking at the largest sum of money I'd ever seen with my name on it. "Congratulations," Catherine said, sliding the check across to me. "You're now officially a professional artist with a documented market value." I stared at the check, but instead of feeling celebration, I felt something more complex. Validation, mixed with anticipation. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of proving to my family that I'd been right about my art all along. At 11:30, my phone started buzzing with messages. Word had somehow gotten out about the sale completion, and my family was in full crisis mode. "Devon, Jade, we need to meet immediately. This can't wait." My mother, "Honey, Edgar is saying there were some complications with the sale. Please call us." My father, "Jade, there are urgent decisions that need to be made today. Come home." I turned off my phone and drove to Luna's coffee house instead. Marcus greeted me with a huge grin and a cappuccino with a heart drawn in the foam. "So how does it feel to be a millionaire artist?" "Surreal. But Marcus, I need to ask you something important. Who told people about the sale?" His expression shifted slightly. "Well, your brother stopped by yesterday asking about the timeline. He seemed to know quite a bit about the transaction already." "What did he want to know?" "Mostly he was asking about the buyer, whether there had been other interested parties, what kind of traffic the paintings had been getting. He said the family was trying to understand the full scope of your success." I felt my jaw clench. Devon had been conducting his own investigation, probably gathering information to present alternative strategies, or find reasons to question Elena's handling of the sale. Did he ask about anything else? He wanted to know if I'd kept records of people who'd photographed the paintings or asked about purchasing them. I showed him those business cards you'd asked me to collect. The business cards, the potential backup buyers that could have been used to create a bidding war or negotiate higher prices. Devin was building a case that the sale could have been handled differently, probably to justify family involvement in future decisions. I spent an hour at Luna's, sitting in the same spot where I'd drunk coffee while working on the Crimson Aurora series, trying to process how my family had turned my artistic achievement into a business investigation. When I finally drove home, I found 3 cars in the driveway: my parents', Devin's BMW, and Edgar's sedan. They were waiting for me in the living room like a tribunal. Edgar had papers spread across the coffee table again, but this time they looked different, more official, more urgent. "Jade," my father started before I'd even sat down, "we need to discuss some serious concerns about how this sale was handled." "What concerns?" Devin stood up, moving into his courtroom mode. "Edgar has identified several issues with the transaction that suggest you may not have received optimal value for your work." He gestured to Edgar, who launched into a prepared presentation about comparable art sales, market timing, and negotiation strategies. According to his analysis, I should have sought multiple appraisals, created a bidding war between collectors, and potentially held off on the sale until my upcoming exhibition generated more market buzz. "Based on recent auction results for similar contemporary pieces," Edgar concluded, "you likely left between $1 and $2 million on the table." The room went quiet, and I could feel everyone watching my reaction. They wanted me to be upset, to regret trusting Elena, to realize that I needed their guidance after all. Instead, I laughed. "That's interesting research, Edgar. Can you show me the documentation of your expertise in art market analysis?" "Well, I've been studying." "Can you show me your client list of artists whose careers you've successfully managed?" Edgar glanced at my parents uncertainly. "Jade, you don't need specialized art experience to understand basic negotiation principles." "You're right. Let me tell you about basic negotiation principles." I pulled out my phone and showed them Anna Kowalski's research. This is a 20-page academic analysis of my work, completed by one of the country's leading art historians. She's documented my artistic significance and projected market value over the next decade. I scrolled to specific sections as I read aloud. Anna's research indicates that Aurora Rising's sale price of $4.8 million represents conservative market value, well below what similar works will command after my solo exhibition and museum introductions. Devin frowned. "What museum introductions?" "The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles wants to include my work in their Emerging Voices exhibition next year. The Metropolitan Museum's contemporary curator has requested a studio visit. 2 university art departments want to add my pieces to their permanent collections." I could see the calculation happening behind my family's eyes. They were realizing that the art world operated according to systems they didn't understand, with value determinations they couldn't predict or control. "Furthermore," I continued, "Edgar's suggestion to create a bidding war would have been professionally disastrous." Elena explained that established collectors don't participate in feeding frenzies. They make serious offers for work they genuinely want to own long-term. Auction tactics would have marked me as an amateur and damaged relationships with collectors who could support my career for decades. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to make sure you weren't taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of by who? The gallery director who spent 6 months strategically positioning my career launch? The collector who's been tracking my work through academic recommendations? The lawyer who specializes in artist representation?" I stood up and gathered Edgar's papers. "Or taken advantage of by the financial advisor who contacted my gallery without authorization and tried to negotiate contract terms that would have destroyed my long-term market value." Edgar's face flushed red. "That was a misunderstanding." that was a violation of my explicit instructions and professional boundaries. I looked around the room at these people who'd raised me, who claimed to love me, who were now sitting in judgment of decisions they had no qualification to evaluate. "Here's what I think happened," I said. "You heard about my success and immediately assumed I was in over my head. You couldn't imagine that someone you'd dismissed as unrealistic and impractical could navigate a complex professional situation better than you could. So you started investigating, questioning, and interfering, trying to prove that I needed your management." Devon started to protest, but I held up my hand. "But what you found instead was that I'd been working with serious professionals who took my art seriously long before any of you did. You found that people with actual expertise in my field had been strategically building my career while you were telling me to get a teaching certificate." The silence stretched until my father finally spoke. "Jade, we're your family. We love you. We want what's best for you. If you wanted what was best for me, you would have supported my art when it was worth $1,200, not just when it's worth millions. If you loved me, you would have trusted my judgment about my own career instead of trying to prove I was being manipulated." I moved toward the door, then turned back. "The Aurora Rising sale closed this morning. I'm now a professional artist with documented market value and serious gallery representation. I have museum interest, academic recognition, and a career trajectory that extends far beyond any single transaction." I looked at each of them individually. "What I don't have is family members who believed in my talent before other people put a price tag on it. And that's something you can't manage, invest, or advise your way back to." As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. "Jade, what does this mean for our relationship?" I stopped but didn't turn around. "That depends on whether you can learn to respect the artist I've always been, instead of trying to manage the millionaire you think I've become." In the days following my confrontation with my family, word about Aurora Rising's sale spread through Millbrook Heights like ripples in a pond. The story morphed as it traveled. By Tuesday, I'd either sold a painting for $10 million or been scammed by an art dealer, depending on who was telling it. My Aunt Vivian called Wednesday morning, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. "Jade, honey, I've been telling everyone at the country club about your success. You're quite the celebrity now." "What exactly have you been telling them?" "Well, about your painting selling for millions, of course. And I made sure to mention how supportive the family has always been of your artistic pursuits." I stared at the phone. "Vivian, you suggested I become a dental hygienist 6 months ago." "Oh, sweetheart, I was just being practical. But I always knew you had talent." After I hung up, I realized this was how it would be. My success would be rewritten into family lore as something they'd always predicted and supported. The years of doubt, dismissal, and suggestions to find real careers would be conveniently forgotten. By Thursday, my extended family had begun reaching out. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. My Uncle Frank, who'd never shown any interest in art, left a voicemail asking if I needed an investment partner for future projects. Even my grandmother called to tell me she'd always known I was destined for great things. But the most revealing call came from Trevor, my MBA cousin who'd spent Thanksgiving explaining why creative fields were pyramid schemes. "Jade, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have been overly critical about the art market. I'm actually working on launching a consulting firm that helps artists navigate business development. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership?" "A partnership doing what?" "Well, you clearly have the creative talent, and I have the business expertise. Together we could help other emerging artists avoid the pitfalls of gallery exploitation." I almost laughed. Trevor was now positioning himself as an expert in artist representation, based on my single successful sale. He wanted to monetize my success by selling advice to other artists about navigating an industry he'd dismissed as worthless weeks earlier. "Trevor, what makes you qualified to advise artists about gallery relationships?" "I've been researching the art market extensively since your sale. There are a lot of inefficiencies and opportunities for optimization. Have you ever created art, worked with galleries, built relationships with collectors? Well, no, but business principles are universal. It was Edgar Thornfield's approach all over again. The assumption that general business knowledge could substitute for specialized expertise in a field they'd never taken seriously. Friday brought news that shifted everything. Elena called with updates about the ripple effects of Aurora Rising's sale. Jade, Dr. Montgomery's acquisition has triggered interest from her entire collector network. I've received inquiries from 4 additional collectors, 2 museum curators, and a dealer from London who wants to discuss international representation. That's incredible. It's more than incredible. It's exactly what we predicted. One high-profile sale has positioned you as a serious investment for other sophisticated collectors. But there's something else you need to know. Elena paused, and I could hear paper rustling. I've been contacted by 3 local galleries who claim they've been, quote, tracking your development and want to discuss representation. Apparently, word about your success has prompted several Millbrook area dealers to suddenly discover your work. Dealers who never showed interest before? Dealers who are now calling you one of the region's most promising emerging artists and claiming they've been watching your career progression. It was the same pattern as my family's sudden support, but in professional circles. Success had retroactively created a history of recognition that hadn't existed when I actually needed it. Elena continued, I've also heard from an art instructor at Millbrook Community College who says you've always been welcome to teach there and that they'd love to discuss a position now that you've achieved quote, market validation. The teaching position my family had pushed me toward for years was now being offered as an honor, a way for the college to associate itself with my success. Elena, how do you handle all the revisionist history, everyone claiming they supported you all along? You learn to distinguish between people who believed in your work before it was profitable and people who want to benefit from your success after it's been validated by others. The first group is very small, the second group is enormous. That weekend, I decided to visit Professor Rodriguez at Whitmore Institute. I needed to thank the person who'd actually supported my career when it mattered. I found him in his studio, grading student work surrounded by the familiar smell of oil paint and turpentine. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine pride. Jade, I heard about Aurora Rising. How does it feel to have the art world finally catch up to your talent? Overwhelming, but Elena told me about your advocacy. Professor Rodriguez, why didn't you tell me you were promoting my work? He set down his grading pen and leaned back in his chair. Because artists need to develop confidence in their own vision before they can handle external validation. If you'd known that established professionals were tracking your progress, you might have started creating for their approval instead of following your own artistic instincts. You've been protecting me from knowing about professional interest? I've been protecting your artistic integrity. The Crimson Aurora series is powerful because you created it without compromise, without second-guessing, without trying to please anyone except yourself. That authenticity is what made it worth millions. Professor Rodriguez pulled out a folder filled with photographs of my work from the past 3 years. I've been documenting your artistic evolution not to sell it but to study it. You've developed techniques that I use as examples in advanced courses. Your understanding of color psychology is sophisticated enough that I've recommended your work to graduate students as research material. I looked through the photographs, seeing my own artistic journey documented by someone who understood its significance before anyone put a price on it. Your family's reaction has been complicated, I said. Families often struggle when someone they've underestimated exceeds their expectations dramatically. They want to celebrate your success while minimizing their own failure to recognize your potential earlier. How do I navigate that? You remember that your worth as an artist was never dependent on their approval. And you surround yourself with people who understood your value before it became financially obvious. Driving home from Whitmore, I thought about the expanding circle of people who now wanted to be associated with my success. family members rewriting history, business contacts offering partnerships, galleries claiming prior interest, institutions extending opportunities. But Professor Rodriguez's folder of photographs reminded me of something important. The people who'd believed in my art when it hung in a coffee shop were fundamentally different from the people who wanted to benefit from its million-dollar value. The first group had seen something meaningful in my work. The second group had seen something profitable. And learning to distinguish between those two motivations would determine who I allowed into my life going forward. 3 months later, I stood in the Whitmore Gallery watching strangers study my paintings with the kind of reverence I had only dreamed about. The opening night of Invisible Voices, The Art of Jade Ashworth, had drawn critics from New York, collectors from across the country, and museum curators who spoke about my work using words like transformative and essential. Crimson Dawn sold within the first hour, Elena whispered as she joined me near the back of the gallery. The collector from Chicago didn't even negotiate. Full asking price. I watched a couple in their 60s standing in front of Velvet Storm, the third piece from my original series. They'd been there for 20 minutes, completely absorbed in studying the brushwork and color transitions. The woman had tears in her eyes. "They're not seeing dollar signs," I murmured to Elena. "They're seeing something that speaks to them." That's the difference between real collectors and investors. Real collectors buy art that changes how they see the world. Dr. Amanda Reeves, the art historian who'd written the exhibition catalog essay, approached us with a glass of champagne and a smile. "Jade, the response has been extraordinary. I've never seen such unanimous critical enthusiasm for an emerging artist's first solo show." "What are they saying?" "The Times critic called your work a masterclass in emotional authenticity. ART News described your technique as classical mastery in service of contemporary truth. But my favorite review came from someone unexpected." She pulled out her phone and showed me an article from Art Forum. Professor Daniel Rodriguez wrote a piece titled "The Patient Cultivation of Genius." He discusses how genuine artistic development happens outside of market pressures and family expectations. I read the opening paragraph, "True artistic vision develops in silence, away from the noise of well-meaning advice and premature validation." Jade Ashworth's emergence as a significant contemporary voice demonstrates what happens when an artist is allowed to follow their instincts without compromise. Professor Rodriguez had turned my story into a case study about protecting artistic integrity during development. But he'd done it without revealing personal details, focusing instead on the broader principles of nurturing creative independence. "He's made you a symbol," Dr. Reeves continued, "not just of artistic success, but of the importance of believing in your own vision when others don't understand it." Across the gallery, I spotted my parents standing awkwardly near the entrance. They'd arrived an hour ago but hadn't approached me yet. My mother wore the same expression she'd had at parent-teacher conferences, when she wasn't sure if I was in trouble or being praised. Elena followed my gaze. "Family dynamics at openings are always interesting. Have they said anything about the exhibition?" "They haven't said anything to me at all. We've barely spoken since the Aurora Rising sale." "That must be difficult." "It's peaceful, actually. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to prove my worth to people who've already decided what I'm capable of." I watched my father studying the wall text next to Aurora Rising, which had been loaned back by Dr. Montgomery specifically for this exhibition. He was reading about the painting's significance to contemporary art discourse and its acquisition by, quote, "a prominent private collector." The language was academic, authoritative, completely different from the dismissive tone he'd used when discussing my, quote, "coffee shop paintings." Devon appeared next to them, still looking uncomfortable in gallery spaces. He'd texted congratulations when the exhibition was announced, but we hadn't discussed the months of family tension that had led to this moment. "Jade." I turned to find my mother approaching, holding a glass of wine like a shield. "The exhibition is beautiful, really beautiful." "Thank you." I read the catalog essay, Dr. Reeves writes about your work like it's important. It is important, to me, and apparently to other people who understand what I'm trying to express. My mother glanced around the gallery, taking in the crowds, the sold stickers on price tags, the intense conversations happening in front of each piece. I don't think I understood what you were building, what any of this meant. You couldn't understand it because you never tried to see it through my eyes. You only saw it through your fears about my financial security. She was quiet for a moment, watching a young art student sketching notes in front of one of my newer pieces. Your father and we grew up believing that success looked a certain way. Stable job, predictable income, conventional achievements. We couldn't imagine that what you were doing was another kind of success. It wasn't success yet, I said. It was preparation for success. And that's what you couldn't trust. The process of becoming something before other people recognized it. My father joined us, still holding the exhibition catalog. Jade, I owe you an apology, not just for doubting your work, but for trying to manage something I didn't understand. Dad, the work didn't change. I didn't suddenly become talented when someone offered millions for Aurora Rising. I was always this artist, you just couldn't see it. You're right. And I realize now that our inability to see your potential doesn't mean it wasn't there. Devin appeared beside them, looking more subdued than I'd ever seen him. Jade, I need to say something. When I tried to investigate your sale, when I contacted your gallery, when I brought Edgar into this, I wasn't trying to help you. I was trying to prove that you needed my help. Why? Because admitting you could handle something this complex without family guidance meant admitting I'd been wrong about your capabilities for years. It was the most honest thing Devin had ever said to me. So you tried to create problems that would justify your involvement. Exactly, and I'm sorry. I looked at my family standing in this gallery space, surrounded by my work being discussed and acquired by strangers who understood its value immediately. They seemed smaller here, less certain, like they were visiting a world where their usual authority didn't apply. I appreciate the apologies, I said, but I need you to understand something. This exhibition isn't the beginning of my career. It's the culmination of years of work you never supported. The difference is that now other people are validating what I always knew about my art. Elena appeared with news that interrupted our conversation. Jade, the Museum of Contemporary Art, wants to discuss acquiring Invisible Voice hash 3 feet for their permanent collection. And there's a collector from London who's flown in specifically to see your work. As Elena led me toward these new conversations, I heard my mother say to my father, I think we lost her. But they were wrong. They hadn't lost me. I had found myself. 2 hours later, as the opening wound down, I stood alone in the gallery looking at my paintings displayed under professional lighting, with museum-quality labels, surrounded by empty champagne glasses and the lingering energy of genuine appreciation. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus at Luna's coffee house. Saw the exhibition coverage in the paper. Proud to have been your first gallery. The new artist we're featuring asked if she could hang her work in the same spot where Aurora Rising used to be. I told her that corner is now known for launching careers. I smiled, thinking about another artist sitting in that coffee shop, working on paintings that might someday hang in galleries like this one, trying to believe in their vision despite everyone who tells them to be practical. 3 weeks later, I bought a studio space in the Arts District downtown, not because I was rich now, but because I was ready. Ready to work without apologizing for my ambitions. Ready to create without seeking approval from people who would never understand the difference between art and commodity. The studio had tall windows, white walls, and enough space for the Invisible Voices series that was already forming in my mind. Portraits of artists who died unrecognized. Writers whose work was dismissed by their families. Innovators who'd been told their ideas were worthless. People like me who'd learned that the most powerful voice is often the one that speaks quietly, persistently, without permission, until the world finally learns to listen. On the easel in my new studio, I started a self-portrait. Not Jade the millionaire artist, not Jade the gallery sensation, but Jade, the woman who'd sat in a coffee shop believing in her work when no one else would. That was the person worth painting. The person who'd been an artist long before anyone thought to call her successful. And, in the quiet of my own space, surrounded by canvases that belonged entirely to me, I finally understood that the validation I'd been seeking had been there all along. It was my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.